Before we begin this story, I want to share why Keanu Reeves inspires me so deeply. In a world where fame often breeds arrogance, Keanu remains humble. In an industry built on image, he chooses substance. What moves me most is not his talent or success, but his quiet consistency in treating every person with dignity. He rides the subway, gives up his seat, takes pay cuts so crew members can be paid fairly, and remembers conversations from decades ago because people matter to him. Keanu teaches us that being a gentleman is not about grand gestures captured by cameras, but about small acts of kindness witnessed by no one. He shows us that true strength lies in gentleness, that real power is using your platform to lift others, and that the measure of character is what you do when nobody is watching. This story you are about to hear captures the essence of why Keanu Reeves is not just a great actor, but a genuinely beautiful human being. It is about patience, memory, and the profound impact of actually listening when someone shares their heart. So let us dive into a moment that revealed the depths of his character in the most unexpected way. The air in Studio 6B felt different that evening, charged with something Sandra Bullock could not name as she sat in the makeup chair. She had been on hundreds of talk shows before, smiled through thousands of interviews, but tonight her chest felt tight in a way that had nothing to do with nerves. The makeup artist brushed powder across her cheeks while Sandra stared at her reflection, wondering why her publicist Maria had been so insistent, so strangely emotional on the phone that morning. There was a weight in the room, invisible but present, like the moment before thunder when the whole world seems to hold its breath. Outside in the hallway, Jimmy Fallon paced with his hands in his pockets, glancing at his watch every few seconds. His producers had never seen him this anxious before a show. He kept pulling out his phone, reading the same text message over and over, then looking toward the back entrance of the studio. The audience was already filing in, their chatter filling the space with ordinary excitement, completely unaware that tonight would be anything but ordinary. Jimmy's stage manager approached him with a headset and a knowing smile, whispering something that made Jimmy nod slowly, his eyes suddenly glistening. Sandra walked onto the set 20 minutes later, waving to the cheering audience, her professional smile perfectly in place. She hugged Jimmy, sat down in the guest chair, and crossed her legs with the ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times. But her hands, Jimmy noticed, were trembling slightly as she placed them in her lap. They started with the usual banter, laughing about her new film, sharing a funny story about her kids that made the audience roar with laughter. Yet underneath the lightness, Sandra felt it again, that strange heaviness, like standing on the edge of something vast and unknown. Then Jimmy's expression shifted. The playfulness drained from his face, replaced by something tender and serious. He leaned forward, his elbows on his desk, and the audience quieted, sensing the change in energy. "Sandra, I need to ask you about something," he said softly. His voice carried a weight that made her spine straighten. "Do you remember filming Speed back in 1994? Sandra laughed, a little confused. "Of course," she replied, "it changed my whole life." Jimmy nodded slowly. "Do you remember a conversation you had with Keanu Reeves during that shoot? Something personal, something you probably thought he had forgotten." The air left Sandra's lungs. The studio audience blurred at the edges of her vision. Her mind immediately flew back 25 years, racing through memories like flipping through an old photo album. There had been so many conversations with Keanu during those intense months of filming. They had become close friends, the kind of friendship forged in early morning calls and dangerous stunts and long hours of waiting between takes. But there was one conversation, one specific day that she had buried deep, a moment of vulnerability she rarely let herself remember. It had been her mother's birthday, the first one after her death. Sandra had barely been holding it together, trying to stay professional on set while grief clawed at her insides. She had retreated to her trailer during lunch, and Keanu had knocked softly, somehow sensing she needed someone. She had broken down completely, told him things she had never told anyone. About her mother's love of Japanese maple trees, about their tradition of planting one together every year on her birthday. About how Sandra had not been able to bring herself to plant one since her mother passed. How the thought of doing it alone felt like accepting she was really gone. And then, in a whisper, she had confessed her deepest dream, the one that felt too big and too scary to pursue. She wanted to create a sanctuary for foster children, a place in nature where they could feel safe and loved and free. Her mother had grown up in foster care, and Sandra had always wanted to honor that pain by creating something beautiful. Keanu had listened without interrupting, holding her hand, his presence calm and solid. He had said something simple, something about dreams needing the right time, about not being alone even when it felt that way. Then they had gone back to set, and life had moved forward, and Sandra had assumed that conversation had faded into the past like so many others. Now sitting under the bright lights of Studio 6B, with Jimmy Fallon watching her carefully and hundreds of audience members leaning forward in their seats, Sandra felt her carefully constructed composure begin to crack. "Jimmy," she said quietly, her voice barely steady, "why are you asking me this? How do you even know about that?" Jimmy smiled, but his eyes were wet. Because Sandra, Keanu never forgot. And what he did with that memory, what he has been working on for the past 2 years without telling a single soul, is why we are here tonight. The studio lights suddenly dimmed. A large screen descended behind them. Sandra's heart hammered against her ribs. She gripped the armrests of her chair, her knuckles white. The audience gasped collectively as the screen flickered to life. And in that moment, Sandra Bullock realized that her whole world was about to change. The screen glowed with an image that made no sense at first, an aerial view of land, vast and green and rolling beneath a golden afternoon sun. Sandra squinted, trying to understand what she was looking at, why her heart was racing, why Jimmy had placed his hand gently on her arm as if steadying her for something. The camera moved slowly, gracefully descending toward the earth, and details began to emerge. Gardens arranged in careful patterns, walking paths that curved through meadows dotted with wildflowers, a pond that reflected the sky like a mirror. Then buildings came into view, a main house with wide porches and rocking chairs, smaller cabins scattered throughout the property, each one painted in soft, welcoming colors. Children's laughter rose from the speakers, pure and unrestrained, and Sandra felt tears spring to her eyes before she even understood why. The camera continued its journey, moving past a playground where kids were swinging and climbing, past a vegetable garden where a group of teenagers were planting seedlings, past an open field where a girl of about 8 was running with a golden retriever chasing behind her. Everything looked alive, real, operational. This was not a rendering or a plan. This was an actual place, where actual children were actually living and laughing. Then the camera stopped, focusing on a single tree. Even on the screen, Sandra could see it was magnificent, a Japanese maple with branches that spread like graceful arms, leaves burning with shades of crimson and amber. The camera moved closer, and a figure stepped into frame. Sandra's breath caught. Keanu stood beneath the tree, wearing a simple black jacket and jeans, his hair slightly windblown, his expression gentle and somehow both nervous and certain at the same time. The studio audience erupted in gasps and whispers, but Sandra barely heard them. Every particle of her attention was locked on the screen. "Hi, Sandy," Keanu's voice came through the speakers, and the familiar sound of it, warm and slightly rough, made something break open in Sandra's chest. "I hope you do not mind me ambushing you like this, but some things cannot wait any longer, and some conversations deserve more than just words." He paused, glancing up at the branches above him. "Do you remember what you told me in 1994 on your mother's birthday in your trailer on the Speed set? You were crying, and you told me about the Japanese maples, about the tradition you and your mom shared. You said you could not do it alone anymore, that planting a tree without her felt impossible." Sandra's hand covered her mouth. Tears were streaming freely now, and she did not care that millions would see this, did not care about her makeup or her image or anything except the man on the screen who had somehow reached across 25 years to touch the most tender part of her heart. "You also told me something else that day," Keanu continued, his voice growing softer. "You told me about a dream, a sanctuary for foster kids, a place where they could be safe and wild and free. You said your mom grew up in the system, bounced between homes, never had a place that was truly hers. You wanted to build something that would have saved her, that could save other kids like her. And then you said something I never forgot." He looked directly into the camera, as if seeing Sandra across time and space. "You said, I am too afraid to try this alone. What if I fail them? What if I cannot do enough?" The camera pulled back, showing more of the property. "That is when I decided," Keanu said, "that whenever you were ready, you would not have to do it alone. I just did not know it would take me 2 years to get it right. Sandra, what you are seeing is real. This is the Bullock Reeves Nature Sanctuary, and it is yours. We open officially next month, but we have been running a soft launch for 3 months now. 22 children are currently in residence, rotating groups that stay for 2-week sessions. They hike, they garden, they heal. They just get to be kids without anyone demanding anything from them." Jimmy handed Sandra a tissue, and she took it blindly, unable to look away from the screen. The video shifted to show the children up close, their faces bright with joy. A counselor was teaching a group how to identify birds. Another group was painting rocks by the pond. A teenage boy was reading under a tree, completely absorbed, safe enough to disappear into a story. Each image was a hammer blow to Sandra's heart, beautiful and devastating. But Keanu was not finished. The camera returned to him beneath the maple tree. "I need to tell you about this tree specifically," he said, kneeling down and placing his hand on the trunk. "This is not just any Japanese maple, Sandy. After our conversation, I tracked down your mother's best friend, Margaret Chen. It took me 8 months to find her, but when I did, I learned she had been caring for something precious. Your mother planted a maple tree in 1982, the year you graduated high school. Margaret kept it alive all these years, tending it in her backyard, waiting for the right moment." He looked up into the branches, his expression full of reverence. "This tree was grown from a cutting of your mother's original tree. We transplanted it here at the heart of the sanctuary, so every child who comes here will rest in the shade of your mother's love." Sandra made a sound, something between a sob and a gasp. The audience was crying now too, the collective emotion in the studio thick enough to touch. Jimmy's eyes were red, his professional composure completely abandoned. On screen, Keanu stood, brushing dirt from his hands. "I know you are watching this surrounded by people, probably overwhelmed, maybe a little angry that I did this without asking," he said with a slight smile. "But I need you to understand something. This has always been your vision, your heart, your dream. I just helped build the container for it. Dozens of people contributed once they heard what we were doing. Cast and crew from Speed, friends of yours from throughout your career, child welfare experts, architects who donated their time. Everyone wanted to be part of this because everyone knows what you are, Sandy. You are someone who gives and never asks for anything back." The camera began to pull away slowly, showing the full scope of the property once more, the buildings and gardens and children and the magnificent tree at the center of it all. But Keanu's voice continued. "I have one more thing to show you," he said, "but I cannot do it through a screen." The video froze on an image of the sanctuary at sunset, golden light pouring over everything like a blessing. The studio lights came up slightly. Sandra sat motionless, her face wet with tears, her chest heaving with the effort of breathing through the tsunami of emotion. Jimmy leaned toward her gently. "Sandra," he said quietly, "Keanu is here tonight, and he brought someone with him, someone who has been waiting 15 years to see you again, someone who has something your mother wanted you to have." The side door of the studio opened. The audience turned as one, craning their necks to see. And there, silhouetted in the doorway, stood Keanu Reeves with his arm around an elderly woman with silver hair and kind eyes. Margaret Chen, her mother's best friend, the keeper of trees and secrets and promises made to the dying. Sandra rose from her chair on shaking legs, her hand pressed to her heart. And as Keanu and Margaret walked slowly toward her across the studio floor, the weight of 25 years of grief and hope and unspoken dreams finally found its release. Time seemed to stop in that moment, the audience fading into a blur of faces, the cameras disappearing, the bright lights dimming to nothing as Sandra focused only on the woman walking toward her. Margaret looked older than Sandra remembered, her hair fully silver now, her movements slower, but her eyes held that same warmth that had comforted Sandra at her mother's funeral 15 years ago. They had lost touch after that, life pulling them in different directions the way it so often does, and Sandra had always felt guilty about it, had always meant to reach out but never quite found the courage to reopen that wound. Now here Margaret stood, real and solid, crossing the studio floor with Keanu's steady hand supporting her elbow. Sandra moved without thinking, her legs carrying her forward until she was embracing Margaret, breathing in the familiar scent of lavender and something else, something that brought her mother back so vividly that Sandra felt like a child again. Margaret's arms wrapped around her tightly, surprisingly strong, and she whispered into Sandra's ear, "Your mother would be so incredibly proud of you, sweet girl. Not for the fame or the awards, but for the size of your heart." Sandra could not speak, could only hold on as waves of grief and joy crashed over her in equal measure. The audience watched in reverent silence, witnessing something too sacred for applause. Jimmy remained at his desk, tears running freely down his face, making no attempt to hide them. Keanu stood back a few steps, giving them space, his hands clasped in front of him, his expression gentle and patient. Finally, Margaret pulled back, cupping Sandra's face in her weathered hands. "I have been waiting for this moment for so long," she said. "When this young man found me last year, when he told me what he wanted to build in your name, I knew the time had finally come. Your mother gave me something before she died, Sandra. She made me promise to keep it safe until you were ready. And I have been carrying that promise for 15 years, waiting for a sign. She glanced at Keanu with gratitude. And then Keanu called, and I knew. Keanu stepped forward then, reaching into his jacket pocket. Sandra watched his hands, those familiar hands she had seen in 1,000 scenes, held during publicity tour, clasped in friendship over decades. He pulled out a small wooden box, simple and unadorned, the kind that holds things too precious for decoration. "This is for you," he said softly, placing it in Sandra's trembling hands. "Open it when you are ready." Sandra looked down at the box, her thumb tracing the smooth wood. The studio was so quiet she could hear her own heartbeat. Slowly, carefully, she lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on black velvet, was a silver pendant on a delicate chain. She lifted it out, and even through her tears she could see numbers engraved on its surface. They looked like coordinates, precise and intentional. She looked up at Keanu, confused and overwhelmed. "Those are the exact latitude and longitude of the Japanese maple at the sanctuary," Keanu explained. His voice was barely above a whisper, intimate despite the cameras and audience. "The tree grown from your mother's original planting, the one Margaret kept alive all these years. I thought you might want to carry it with you, to know that your mother's love has a specific place in the world now, coordinates you can return to whenever you need to remember." Sandra's knees weakened, and Keanu's hand was immediately there, steadying her, guiding her back to the chair. Jimmy brought Margaret a seat as well, placing it close to Sandra. The whole show had abandoned its format, its schedule, its careful planning. This was something else now, something unrehearsed and raw and real. "But there is more," Margaret said, settling into her chair with a sigh. She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope, yellowed slightly with age, Sandra's name written across it in handwriting that made time collapse. Sandra recognized her mother's script instantly, those careful loops and curves, the way she dotted her eyes with perfect little circles. "This is not possible," Sandra whispered, reaching for the envelope with shaking hands. "When did she write this?" 3 weeks before she passed," Margaret said gently. "She was very weak by then, but she insisted. She said she had been watching you your whole life, watching you give and give to everyone around you, watching you pour your heart into your work and your friends and your causes. She said you had forgotten how to dream for yourself, how to believe you deserved beautiful things. She made me promise to give this to you when you were ready to fly." Those were her exact words. "When you were ready to fly." Sandra stared at the envelope, afraid to open it, afraid of what her mother's words might unleash. Keanu knelt beside her chair, his presence grounding her. "You do not have to read it now," he said quietly. "You do not have to share it with anyone. But your mom was right, Sandy. You have spent 25 years taking care of everyone else. This sanctuary, this dream, it is not just for those kids. It is for you too. It is permission to believe in something big and beautiful and yours." The audience had disappeared completely from Sandra's awareness. There was only this moment, this letter, this impossible gift from beyond the grave. She slid her finger under the seal, careful not to tear the paper, and pulled out 2 handwritten pages. Her mother's words swam before her eyes at first, but then they focused, and Sandra began to read silently. "My dearest Sandra," the letter began. "If you are reading this, it means Margaret has found the right moment, and you are finally ready to become who you were always meant to be. I am writing this from my hospital bed, watching the sunset through the window, thinking about all the trees we planted together over the years. Each one was a prayer, sweetheart, a hope planted in the earth. But the most beautiful tree I ever planted was you." Sandra's breath caught. She continued reading, her mother's voice echoing in her mind as clearly as if she were speaking aloud. "You were always so afraid of not being enough, of failing the people you love. But darling, you do not honor suffering by suffering yourself. You honor it by creating joy. You honor pain by building sanctuaries. You honor loss by making sure others find what was lost to you." The letter went on, her mother describing her own childhood in foster care, the loneliness and fear, the hunger for a place to belong. And then she wrote something that shattered Sandra completely. "I never told you this because I did not want you to carry it as a burden, but I am telling you now so you can carry it as a purpose. When I was 9 years old, living in my 4th foster home, there was a social worker who took me to a park one afternoon. We sat under a Japanese maple tree, and she told me that someday, when I was grown, I should plant trees for all the lost children. She said trees remember they outlive us, they provide shelter long after we are gone. That social worker's kindness saved my life that day, gave me hope when I had none. And I want you to know, Sandra, that you have been planting trees in people's hearts your entire life. Now it is time to plant them in the earth too." Sandra looked up from the letter, her face streaked with tears, and found Keanu watching her with such tenderness that she felt held by it. "How did you know?" she asked, her voice breaking. How did you know this was what I needed? Keanu smiled, that small, humble smile that had always been so uniquely him. Because I have been your friend for 25 years, Sandy, he said simply. And friendship means paying attention to the things people say when they think no one is listening. Jimmy leaned forward then, his voice thick with emotion. Sandra, there is one more thing, he said. The sanctuary does not just have Margaret's blessing and Keanu's vision. There are about 60 people who helped make this happen, and some of them are here tonight. Would you like to meet them? Before Sandra could answer, the studio doors opened again, and people began filing in. Sandra gasped as she recognized face after face. Jeff Daniels from Speed, looking older but grinning widely. Her assistant from 20 years ago, who had moved away and started a nonprofit. A director she had worked with who specialized in documentary films about children in crisis. A landscape architect she had once mentioned loving in a magazine interview. Her college roommate who had become a child psychologist. On and on they came, a constellation of people from different parts of her life, all connected by this one secret project. And at the very end of the line, moving slowly but deliberately, came a young woman in her mid-20s, holding the hand of a small girl. Sandra stared, recognition dawning slowly and then all at once. The young woman was Emily, a teenager Sandra had mentored 10 years ago through a Big Sister program, a foster kid who had been angry and lost and brilliant. And the little girl beside her, with Emily's same dark eyes and determined chin, looked up at Sandra with curiosity. "Hi, Ms. Bullock," Emily said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "I wanted you to meet my daughter, Hope. And I wanted to tell you that because of you, I broke the cycle. I am not in the system anymore. I have a family now. I have a life. And when Keanu reached out and told me about the sanctuary, I knew I had to be part of it. I am going to be one of the lead counselors. I am going to be for those kids what you were for me." And in that moment, surrounded by the evidence of a life lived with intention and heart, Sandra Bullock finally understood what her mother had been trying to tell her, what Keanu had been showing her all along. Kindness is never wasted, love is never forgotten, and the smallest gesture of care can ripple forward through time in ways we cannot imagine. But Keanu had one final surprise, one last revelation that would change everything. Keanu waited until the room had settled, until the emotions had crested and the audience had wiped their eyes and found their breath again. He remained standing beside Sandra's chair, his hand resting lightly on the back of it, a quiet presence that had anchored her through the storm of revelations. Margaret sat on her other side, holding Sandra's hand, the letter from her mother now carefully folded in Sandra's lap, along with the silver pendant that caught the studio lights and scattered them like tiny stars. Sandra looked up at Keanu, and something in his expression told her there was more, that the evening had not yet revealed all its secrets. She felt simultaneously exhausted and electrified, emptied out and filled to overflowing. "Keanu," she said softly, "I do not know how to thank you for this. I do not even know where to begin." He shook his head gently. "You do not thank someone for giving back what was always yours," he replied. "But there is something else, something I need to show you before we finish tonight." He nodded to Jimmy, who pulled out a tablet and handed it to Sandra. Keanu knelt beside her again so he could see the screen too. "What you have seen tonight is the sanctuary as it exists now," Keanu said. "But what you have not seen is how it came to be, the actual journey of building it. I kept a video diary over the past 2 years, just short clips on my phone, because I wanted you to see that this was not just my project or Margaret's vision or even your mother's dream. This was a community effort, strangers becoming family because your life touched theirs." Sandra pressed play, and the screen filled with shaky footage of an empty field, Keanu's voice narrating. "Day one," he said in the video. "Just purchased the land, 200 acres in the Shenandoah Valley. Standing here trying to imagine what Sandy would want, what would make kids feel safe." The video cut to Keanu meeting with architects, spreading blueprints across a truck bed, pointing and discussing. Then it jumped to the first day of construction, workers breaking ground while Keanu handed out coffee and donuts, learning everyone's names. But what struck Sandra most were the small moments scattered throughout. Keanu planting flowers himself, his hands deep in soil, consulting with a horticulturist about which plants would be most welcoming to children. Keanu testing playground equipment, actually climbing and swinging to make sure it was safe and fun. Keanu sitting with child psychologists, taking notes in a worn notebook, asking question after question about what traumatized kids need most. In every frame, his focus was absolute, his care evident, his commitment unshakable. The video showed him visiting Margaret, the two of them sitting in her garden beside the original maple tree, planning its careful transplantation. It showed him tracking down people from Sandra's past, explaining his vision, watching their faces light up with understanding. There was footage of him sitting alone late at night in the partially constructed main house, looking tired but content, talking quietly to the camera. "I hope she does not hate me for doing this without asking," he said in that clip. But some gifts are too important to risk someone saying no out of fear or humility. Sometimes you have to build the dream first and then hand someone the keys. The final clip was from just 3 days ago. Keanu stood in the completed sanctuary at dawn, the Japanese maple glowing in the early light behind him. "Tomorrow I am going to surprise Sandy on national television," he said to the camera, "and I am terrified. Not that she will not like it, but that it will not be enough, that it will not fully honor what she told me 25 years ago. But then I remember what my own mother taught me before she died. She said that love is not about grand gestures. It is about remembering the small things, the quiet confessions, the dreams whispered in moments of vulnerability. She said the greatest gift you can give someone is to show them you were listening, really listening all along." Sandra set down the tablet, unable to speak. The weight of being seen so completely, so faithfully, was almost unbearable. Keanu stood and reached into his jacket one more time. "This is the last thing, I promise," he said with a slight smile. He pulled out a set of keys on a simple ring. "These are yours, Sandy. Keys to the main house, to the office, to every building on the property. But more than that, they are keys to a choice. You can be as involved as you want to be, or you can simply know it exists and let others run it. There is no pressure, no expectation. The sanctuary will operate whether you visit once a year or once a week. But it will always be there, a physical place that proves your dream was real and worthy and possible." Sandra took the keys, feeling their weight in her palm. She looked at Emily, standing with her daughter, living proof that care creates ripples across time. She looked at Margaret, guardian of trees and promises, keeper of a mother's final words. She looked at the faces of the 60 people who had gathered in the studio, each one a thread in the tapestry of her life. And she looked at Keanu, patient and humble, a man who had spent 2 years and countless resources building a dream he could have taken credit for, but chose instead to give away completely. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady despite her tears. "My mother's letter said that I have been planting trees in people's hearts my whole life," Sandra said. "But what I am learning tonight is that those trees grew, and now they are giving back shade and shelter and fruit." She looked directly at Keanu. "You did not just build a sanctuary for children, Keanu. You built one for me too. You gave me proof that kindness is never forgotten, that listening matters, that friendship is sacred. And you did it in the most gentle way possible, by honoring my mother, by including Margaret, by making this about community instead of charity." She stood, still holding the keys, and addressed the audience directly. "For anyone watching this who thinks they are too small to make a difference, who thinks their dreams are too big or they are too alone, please hear this. You are not alone. The moment you speak a dream out loud, even just once to one person, you plant a seed. And if you are lucky enough to have a friend who really listens, who really sees you, that seed can grow into something beyond your wildest imagination. But you have to be brave enough to speak it first. You have to trust that your heart's desires matter." Keanu stepped beside her, and together they faced the cameras. "This sanctuary will serve thousands of kids over the years," Keanu said. "But its real purpose is bigger than that. It is a testament to what becomes possible when we take each other's pain seriously, when we remember what people tell us in their most vulnerable moments, when we choose to build instead of just sympathize. Sandra trusted me with her grief 25 years ago, and I have been carrying it carefully ever since, waiting for the right time to transform it into something life-giving." Jimmy joined them then, his face still wet with tears. "I think we can all agree this is the most beautiful thing we have ever witnessed on this show," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But what strikes me most is how quiet it could have been. Keanu, you could have done this publicly, made it a media event, gotten credit and praise. Instead, you worked in secret for 2 years. Why?" Keanu's answer was pure and simple. "Because it was never about me," he said. "It was about honoring a conversation, keeping a promise I made to myself when I saw my friend hurting. The world does not need more people seeking credit for kindness. It needs more people who do kind things simply because they are the right things to do. My mother taught me that true gentlemen do not perform goodness, they live it quietly and consistently. And the greatest privilege of my life has been having friends like Sandra who inspire that kind of devotion." Sandra embraced him then, and the audience rose in a standing ovation that seemed to shake the studio itself. But in the center of all that noise and emotion, There was a pocket of perfect peace, two old friends holding each other, honoring a bond forged in youth and strengthened by time and proven by action. Margaret stood and raised her hand, waiting for the audience to quiet. "I am an old woman," she said, her voice surprisingly strong, "and I have seen a lot in my 87 years. But what happened here tonight gives me hope for humanity. Sandra's mother was my best friend for 40 years, and I watched her daughter grow from a girl into a woman of extraordinary compassion. And I have watched Keanu prove that masculinity and tenderness are not opposites, that strength is sometimes measured in patience, that power is best used in service of other people's dreams." She looked at both of them with fierce love. "You two represent the best of what humans can be. Never forget that." The show wrapped quietly after that, the usual fanfare replaced by something more reverent. As the audience filed out, many stopped to hug strangers, wipe their eyes, whisper to each other about calling old friends or pursuing forgotten dreams. The energy in the room had shifted something fundamental in each person present. Backstage, away from cameras, Sandra sat with Keanu and Margaret in comfortable silence. Finally, she spoke. "When do we go see it in person?" she asked. "When can I stand under my mother's tree?" Keanu smiled. "Whenever you are ready," he said. "But I was hoping maybe next week. There is a group of 8 kids arriving for their first session, and I thought you might want to be there to welcome them. No speeches, no press, just you being present if you want to be." Sandra nodded, clutching the keys and the pendant and her mother's letter. "I want to be," she whispered. "I am ready to fly." Ending reflection. As I finish this story, I am overwhelmed by the lessons it teaches us, lessons that feel especially vital in our current world. Keanu Reeves showed us that being a gentleman has nothing to do with outdated gender roles and everything to do with profound respect for another person's humanity. He demonstrated that true listening is an act of love, that remembering what someone tells you in confidence is a sacred responsibility, and that friendship is not passive but active, not just feeling affection, but taking action on behalf of someone's well-being. Sandra's journey teaches us that vulnerability is not weakness but the gateway to connection. When she shared her pain with Keanu 25 years ago, she could not have known she was planting a seed that would eventually become a sanctuary. This reminds us to speak our dreams out loud, even when they seem impossible, because we never know who is listening with the kind of heart that transforms wishes into reality. The story also reveals that kindness compounds across time. Sandra's care for Emily a decade ago came back as Emily's commitment to help other foster children. Margaret's faithfulness in tending a tree for 15 years created a living memorial that will shelter children for generations. Every act of goodness ripples forward in ways we cannot predict or control, but we can trust that nothing loving is ever wasted. Perhaps most importantly, this story challenges our culture's obsession with credit and recognition. Keanu worked in secret for 2 years, spending his own money and time, assembling teams and solving problems, all without any guarantee of public acknowledgement. He did it simply because his friend had been hurting and he had the resources to help. This is the antidote to our performative age, where people film their charity for social media likes. Real kindness does not need an audience. It needs only a genuine desire to ease someone's burden. The sanctuary itself is a metaphor for what we all can build when we take each other's pain seriously. Not everyone has Keanu's resources, but everyone has the ability to listen deeply, remember carefully, and act faithfully. You can be someone's sanctuary by showing up consistently, by honoring their struggles, by believing in their dreams when they have stopped believing in themselves. As you go forward from this story, I hope you carry these truths with you. Listen to people like their words matter because they do. Remember the small things people tell you, especially about their pain and their dreams. Be willing to wait years if necessary before acting on that knowledge, trusting that the right timing will reveal itself. Use whatever resources you have, whether money or time or skills or simply presence, to build something beautiful for someone else. And do it all quietly, humbly, without needing applause or recognition, because the real reward is knowing you helped turn someone's sorrow into sanctuary. Keanu Reeves is called a gentleman not because he holds doors or pays for meals, though he does those things too. He is called a gentleman because he treats every human being with dignity, because he remembers that fame and wealth are privileges to be used for good, because he understands that the measure of a life is not what you accumulate, but what you give away. In a world that often feels harsh and disconnected, he reminds us that we can choose differently. We can choose kindness, we can choose humility, We can choose to be people who plant trees under whose shade we may never sit. May we all find friends who listen like Keanu listened. May we all be brave enough to share our hearts like Sandra shared hers. May we all be faithful guardians like Margaret, tending what has been entrusted to us until the perfect moment of revelation. And may we all remember that we are never too small to make a difference. Our dreams are never too big to pursue. And love, real love, is the most powerful force in the universe. This is not just a story about celebrities doing something nice. This is a story about what becomes possible when human beings truly see each other, honor each other, and commit to building a more compassionate world, one conversation, one memory, one tree at a time. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope this story planted something in your heart, and I hope you will tend it carefully until it grows into something beautiful that shelters others. Because that is what we are all called to do, to be gardeners of each other's dreams, architects of each other's healing, and guardians of the truth that kindness always, always matters.